John, as that commander, what are you starting to look at then as far as logistics and resources? How many personnel are you going to typically want to affect these kind of rescues? And what are all those people's jobs going to start becoming?
Looking at the environment, when we're getting that good assessment on the ice, will dictate what type of logistics that we're going to be running into. Once we establish the environment itself, how stable or unstable the ice platform is, we know that there is some instability in the ice, because bottom line is somebody's fallen through. They've called the fire department that we're here to make a rescue. You know that somebody's gone through the ice. So the chances are that as soon as I put rescue personnel out there, they're going to fall through the ice. I have to look at logistically as a commander, the personnel that I have. Their qualities, their capabilities, the proper PPE that they have on, what our capabilities are that are quickly available to us to perform that rescue. We may be limited only based on manpower to do shore-based techniques until another piece of equipment arrives, and another boat apparatus arrives, or another resource comes to you. Remember, the dive teams sometimes take a little bit of time to assemble, so an early notification as an incident commander to get those guys en route to you as quickly as possible is critical. So once I establish my core group of manpower of what I'm going to have, at minimum I need to have somebody, a tactical officer, an incident commander, just to go and run the operations portion of it. I'm going to have a primary and a backup personnel that are shore-based, and they're the ones that are going to make that initial assessment of that patient. They're going to sit there and talk to them. They're going to say, establish all those benchmarks, their capabilities, whether self-rescue or they're getting ready to go under the water. We need to move quicker on a different action plan. So they make that initial assessment, those primary and secondary backup personnel from the shore. They're looking for other victims, so they have a very critical role in that. During that time period, as those two personnel are making contact with the victim and looking for other victims, I have my primary and secondary rescuers donning on the equipment necessary to perform the rescue, whether it's going to be boat-based or go or wading or whatever. But they are assembling all the equipment and getting ready to make that rescue. So at a minimum, we need 5 people: a primary and a secondary backup personnel, a primary and a secondary rescuer, a tactical officer of the operations, and then an overall incident commander.
Okay, and if you really had your druthers, what would you start adding to that complement as far as safety officers, other support personnel? We're going from 5 to what? What's your ideal?
Ideally, you want to double up. I mean, if you have multiple, especially if you have multiple victims, if I have a report of 2 people out on the ice, you're going to have to double up on that. At minimum, get you another safety officer to get an overall look. Make sure that everybody's got the proper PPE on. We don't want anybody within 10 feet of the water without some kind of form of flotation. Absolutely no fire gear. It's critical, for that safety officer to look at that portion of it to make sure that no fire gear is anywhere near the water. So then conversely, I want to add a second team, a complete complement of 5 more personnel.
All right, so John, we've pretty much discussed the responsibilities initially of the primary and secondary backup personnel. So that's that first company arriving on scene, establishing contact with the victim, doing an ice assessment, a victim assessment, and communicating that information in their size up. When the next personnel gather up on scene, you talked about having a primary and secondary rescuer. What are the responsibilities encompassed-wise of the primary and secondary rescuer?
The biggest thing for them is just getting their equipment ready, donning on the proper PPE that they're going to use, whether it's a immersion suit or a dry suit or whatever complement that they're going to use, and they're duplicating it. So I got a primary rescuer. You're going to be my main go-to guy. He's putting on his equipment, making sure the harness is on, and each primary and secondary rescuer are watching each other, make sure that the harness is attached properly, make sure the PPE's on. We're checking each other out, making sure that our rope equipment is ready, our carabiners are ready, our boat is ready, so that's what their job responsibilities. Anything that's going to be part of that rescue, it's the primary and secondary rescuer's responsibility to gather that equipment necessary to perform that task.
So there has to be some pretty definitive communications between the rescue officer or the tactical officer, the incident commander, and that rescue team. So I kind of like the way we're laying out and we're discussing this communication sequence of the initial primary and secondary backup guys, communicating all their findings, and then the rescue officer and the incident commander developing kind of an action plan and ultimately communicating that to the rescue team, and then kind of putting all that together to figure out what kind of resources we need to pull that off. So as the rescuer officer, what are his primary responsibilities beyond just communicating that action plan to the rescuers?
Well, he has to take that information, gathered up from all his sources, develop that action plan, and then implement that action plan. And then the biggest key factor for him is having a backup plan. A lot of times that we are focused on the initial plan, but sometimes we may forget to have that. So it's really critical for that operations guy to think about, okay, what's my backup plan? And then relaying that information to the overall incident commander. The incident commander is the one that's going to allocate the resources that rescue officer needs to implement the action plan. So
Okay.
it's real critical to make sure that all the players are talking to each other, communicating, and getting that action plan developed.
Yeah. One of the other things that we are pretty passionate about here at Rescue Methods is ensuring that our initial action sequences are as simplistic as possible. Don't over-rescue. So we're big advocates of saying for that initial action sequence and that primary plan, pick the simplest, cleanest, neatest, easiest to understand and implement technique, tactics, equipment, all of that. Use that simplistic plan first and then develop secondary plans that get more advanced and more complicated from there.
Absolutely, that's just all. It's just critical, keeping everything in a simple manner. You know as well as I do that training is difficult. We're trying to provide that, here with Rescue Methods, but having, a very simplistic plan. Sometimes we don't always practice, our rescues, our ice rescues. Maybe it's been a year, since the last time you had good ice to do some training on, and the last time you donned your suits, and all of a sudden now you're placed into that rescue mode, the very first ice day, the first cold day in the winter time, and then you got to go back to a plan that you remember that's very basic, very easy, very safe to do, and it gets the job done.